Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. Today we are from Group 6. We'll be presenting the macroeconomic assignment, the topic 5, inflation. So now I am Arif Najmi, will be presenting about inflation. So what is inflation? Inflation can be defined as a sustained increase in the general price level. When most prices of goods and services in the economy increase, the general price level will increase accordingly. So this indicates a higher general price level indicates a high inflation rate in the economy. So if the inflation rate is said to be 3%, it means that on average, the price of all goods has increased by 3%. And inflation rate also can be measured using Consumer Price Index, CPI. An increase in CPI can be caused by an increase in main index. Main index includes food, drinks, clothing, rent, and other things. So let's move on to the types of inflation. Inflation have two types. The first one is demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when the aggregate demand AD exceeds the aggregate supply. This type caused by an excess in spending. When demand exceeds the output capacity supplied by the economy, there will be a pressure on the price level. For example, post-COVID-19. As lockdown lifted, consumer demand surged suddenly for goods and services, but supply chains couldn't keep the pace, leading to widespread price increases. And demand pull inflation, when the economy is near full employment level, an increase in aggregate demand will cause an increase in general price level. The excess spending can be because of too much money supplied in the economy to the government budget deficit. So next, the cost push inflation. Cost push inflation occurs when an increase in the cost of production decreases the aggregate supply, resulting in the price increase. This type caused by an increase in cost of production for each unit of output produced. For example, if the price of raw materials or wages increases, the cost per unit of output will also increase. When cost of production increases, aggregate supply decreases and causes the price of goods and services to increase, and that's its cost inflation. So let's relate to the relevant data in 2036. So according to the article, national inflation edges up in March as fuel costs rise, drive gold markets. 2036 April 13 to start. Headline inflation ticked upwards to 1.7% year-on-year in March 2036, up from 1.4% in February. And the core inflation increased to 2.1% from 2%. And the main driver is the increase in fuel prices. This is because Bank Negara Malaysia explained that prices went up because global oil prices rose, which made local retail fuel more expensive. This is a classic example of cost push inflation. When international oil prices spiked, it became much costlier to produce energy, manufacture goods, and transport items. Because shipping and transport affect almost every consumer product, these higher businesses' expenses force companies to raise their prices across the board, driving up the country's overall inflation. And that's all for me. I will be passing the stage to the next presenter. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Afif Azizi. Now I'm going to talk about subsidies. So first, what is a subsidy? A subsidy is financial help given by the government to reduce the cost of goods and services for consumers and businesses. Subsidies are important because they help people manage rising living costs and make essential items more affordable. In Malaysia, the government provides subsidies for things like fuel and basic necessities to help reduce the burden on the rakyat. So next, just like Arif said, inflation rate increased mainly because fuel prices become more expensive. One of the reasons for the increase in fuel prices was the conflict in West Asia, which affected global oil supply and caused global oil prices to rise. When fuel prices increase, transportation and businesses operating costs also increase. As a result, the prices of goods and services become more expensive for consumers. So, to reduce the impact of inflation, the Malaysian government introduced subsidy programs such as Budi 95. So now, what is Budi 95? Budi 95 is a targeted fuel subsidy program introduced by the government to help eligible Malaysians manage rising fuel costs. Through this program, the government continues to provide subsidy fuel prices for consumers, especially those who need financial support. The purpose of Budi 95 is to ensure that nations are still able to afford fuel even when global oil prices increase. So now, what is the role of Budi 95? Firstly, Woody 95 help reduce transportation costs. Many businesses rely on transportation to deliver goods and services. When fuel prices increase due to global issues such as the West Asia conflict, lorry drivers and delivery riders and public transport operators need to spend more money on fuel. Because of this, businesses may increase product prices to cover their higher costs. However, subsidies like Woody 95 help reduce fuel expenses, allowing transportation costs to remain more stable. This helps slow down the increases in prices of goods and services. For example, food delivery riders and logistic companies use fuel every day for deliveries. Without subsidies, delivery charges may become more expensive, which would affect both businesses and consumers. Through Body 95, they can reduce fuel costs and continue operating without increasing prices too much. Secondly, subsidies help people afford daily necessities. When transportation costs increase, the prices of food, groceries, and household items also become more expensive. Without subsidies, many consumers would struggle with the higher cost of living. So with subsidies, it helps lower the transportation costs and at the same time, subsidies help keep prices more affordable and reduce the pressure on consumers, especially during inflation. Besides that, subsidies are very important for low-income households such as the B40 group. These families spend most of their income on food, transport, and utilities. Rising prices can make life more difficult for them. Through programs like Budi 95, the government helps reduce their financial burden, such as expenses, and supports them in managing their daily living costs. Subsidies also help small and new businesses survive during inflation. It helps businesses reduce operating costs. Small businesses usually have limited capital, so rising fuel prices can increase their delivery and operating costs. Without government support, some businesses may need to increase prices or face losses. Subsidies help businesses continue operating while keeping prices more reasonable for consumers. So I think that's all for me. Now I'll pass it to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Akif Muammar bin alias. So my turn to explain definition of supply chain. What is supply chain? A supply chain is an entire network of individuals, organization, resources, activities, and technology involved in the creation and sale of a product. It encompasses everything from the delivery of source materials from the supplier to the manufacturer through to its ultimate delivery to the end consumer. So for the example, look at the chart on the left showing popular Malaysian dishes like nasi lemak and nasi kandar. To serve a plate of nasi lemak, we need a supply chain, farmers to grow rice and cucumbers, fishermen to catch and covers, and delivery trucks to bring everything to the restaurant. So next. Supply chain processes. The supply chain of a nasi kandar restaurant in Penang. To serve a single plate of nasi kandar to a customer, along an interconnected network must work seamlessly. This slide break down the supply chain into four main stages. It starts with primary producers who get the raw ingredients, then logistic or transportation move these goods. Next, processing and preparation happen at the restaurant, and finally it goes to the end consumer. Let's take a nasi kandar nasi lemak and let's take a nasi kandar restaurant in Penang as an example. First, primary producers harvest rice and chicken. Second, logistic trucks transport them to Penang. Third, chef cook them during the processing stage. Lastly, the end consumer enjoys the hot meal at the table. So next, impact on the supply chain and business cost. So analysis, food is a foundational input for logistics. Without subsidies like the Body 95 program. Shipping, freight, and distribution costs skyrocket. The next upstream to downstream effect. Suppliers pass their increased transportation costs down to manufacturers, who then pass them to wholesalers and finally to retailers. This compounds costs at every single stage of the supply chain. So for the economic issues, in Malaysia, a rise in subsidized diesel or petrol directly affects commercial lorry transport flats. If it costs more to transport raw ingredients like flour, vegetables, or meat from farms in Cameron Highlands or Port in Klang to urban supermarkets, the retail prices of those goods inevitably surge. So that's all for me. I will pass the stage to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Aspares and I will explain the answer for the question 4. So first, what is purchasing power? Purchasing power refers to the ability of consumers to buy goods and services with their income. When prices increase due to inflation, purchasing power decreases because the same amount of money can buy fewer items. So how about the Consumer Price Index (CPI)? A Consumer Price Index (CPI) is a statistical estimate of the level of prices of goods and services bought for consumption purpose by household. It is calculated as the weighted average price of a market basket of consumer goods and services. So next we will see the impact of fresh food prices on Malaysia's inflation trend and low-income household. So first we will see the impact on Malaysia's overall inflation trend. If fresh food prices in Malaysia do not decrease, the country's overall inflation rate will remain high because food items such as vegetable, chicken, fish, eggs, and rice are major components of the consumer price index. Since food is a daily necessity purchased by all households, continuous increases in food prices will create inflationary pressure in the economy. As a result, the cost of living will continue to rise and consumers will need to spend a larger portion of their income on a basic necessities. In addition, higher fresh food prices can lead to the cost push inflation, where businesses face high operating costs due to more expensive raw ingredients. Restaurants, stores, supermarkets, and food manufacturing may increase the prices of goods and services in order to maintain profits. This situation reduces consumers' purchasing power because less income is available for other goods and services. Persistent inflation may also reduce economic stability and force the government to continue providing subsidies or financial aid programs to help ease the financial burden on citizens. So next we will see the impact on low-income household, which is B40. The B40 group will be the most affected if fresh food prices did not decrease because low-income households spend a large proportion of their income on necessities, especially food. Since B40 families have limited saving and lower disposable income, rising fresh food prices will place a heavier financial burden on them as living costs continue to increase. This household may struggle to afford basic needs and become more vulnerable to inflation compared to high income groups, which may also worsen income inequality in society. Besides that, rising food prices may force families to reduce the quantity or quality of food they consume in order to save money. Some households may choose cheaper and less nutritious food, which can negatively affect health and nutrition, especially among children and elderly family members. Higher living costs also make it harder for B40 household to pay rent, transportation, healthcare, education, and utility bills. In more serious situations, some families may borrow money or use credit to cover their expenses, increasing household debt and reducing their overall quality of life. So next, one current economy that issues that relevant with this situation is the increases in chicken and egg price following the government's gradual removal of subsidies in 2025. Producers face higher costs of imported animal feed, transportation, and logistics, which cause food prices to rise further. Since chicken and eggs are staple food consumed daily by most Malaysians, increase in their prices directly affect the country inflation rate and overall cost of living. In addition, restaurants, stores, and food vendors increased menu prices because ingredient costs became more expensive. Common meals such as nasi lemak and chicken rice also became more expensive compared to previous years. This issue heavily affected B40 households because they spend a large proportion of their income food and daily necessities. As a result, the government introduced programs such as Jualan Ramah and Semangat Tunang Ramah STI to help reduce the financial burden on low-income groups. So the next slide we will see these are the following sources serve as our references where we gather in the information used completing in this assignment. So that's all from us. Thank you.